Before we get started, let's cue the music. Nope, wait, don't want to get a copyright strike. Cue the other song and make it kind of off-break. Yeah, that's it. There we go. Hi there, I'm Mike, and what I have for you today are all 7 jizz wailing members of the Modal nodes, or 8 members, or 6 members, or 5. Listen, I've looked at a lot of internets to find out what's up with this band roster, and I've had a bit of a time trying to figure out who is and isn't in the band and what they do or don't play. However many band members your Cantina band has, we can all agree on one thing. It's a lot of jizz. Your band can be made up of whatever you want. I choose 7 because 8 bits is just too many bits for me. And frankly, that's a lot more jizz than I can handle. Also, this is what's listed on the official Star Wars website under the entry for Figrin and the Modal nodes. This 7-piece ensemble of Bith musicians was a common sight at the Mos Eisley Cantina, playing swinging instrumentals for the watering hole staggering patrons. The Modal nodes leader, Fiery Figrin played the clue horn, though some patrons preferred his work on the Cassan string drum. Other members of the Modal nodes were Nayland Cheel on the bandfill, Duik Nuts on the Durranian Beshnikel, also known as a fizz, and that's with 3 Z's. Tedin Dahai on the fanfare, Tech Moore on the omnibox, that's 2 hymns there, Ichabel Gaunt on the double jossamer, and Sunil Aide on the drums. Fun fact, writing the script was an absolute bith to do with autocorrect on. Half of these words aren't real words at all, and my computer is now convinced I'm illiterate. After just under 10 years of Black Series figures, Hasbro is finally giving us a piece of my favorite part of A New Hope, the Cantina band. The Cantina scenes would not have been as iconic or memorable had it not been for that jizz hitting you right in the face. To accomplish this, instead of giving us 6 or 7 or 8 identical figures with a different instrument in the package and their respective name on the box, which in hindsight would have frankly been a lot easier to make video on, instead they gave us 1 figure with Figrin's name on the box. Well, and then another deluxe figure, we'll get to that. In this box, we have Figrin. It's accessorized with a clue horn, a Durranian Beshnikel, and either a fanfare or a double jossamer. It's not listed on the box what it is, and I honestly have no idea. I tried looking it up online, and they look identical to me. I even asked Wikipedia and Pablo Hidalgo on Twitter, and no one would respond to me. They were conspicuously silent. It's like some kind of state secret. I'm afraid that if I pursue the truth anymore, I'll start getting cryptic death threats. I may have already said too much. On the back of Figrin's box, there is a bio that's basically just about Figrin, despite the box also being made to represent the other 3 members as shown on the mural here. Although weirdly enough, the mural features Nayland Cheel on the bandfill, despite him also getting his own figure. But the weird issues with the box don't actually stop there. One actually is this jacket right here. It's not anything like what's on the figure that we got. And why is backup clue hornist Liren Karn on the box when he's the only band member you can't really make because of his sweet jacket? Definitely some odd choices, Hasbro. Anyways, here's what the back of the box actually says. Figrin was the rockin' frontman for the all-Bith band the Modal nodes. His deft playing on the clue horn for the band earned him the nickname Fiery Figrin. And then Hasbro released a companion piece to go with Figrin. Here we have a deluxe figure with Nayland Cheel's name on the box, who comes with the exact same son of a Bith that was in the Figrin box. But also, we get an omnibox, a Cassan string drum, and a bandfill. Also, there's some drumsticks here, and then not 1, not 2, but actually 3 sets of extra hands. Similar to Figrin's box, the mural on the side depicts 2 other band members, but one of them is clearly Duik Nuts with the Durranian Beshnikel, which is not actually in this box. Anyways, here's what Nayland's bio says. Members of the Modal nodes, like Nayland Cheel on the bandfill, played their recognizable tunes in the Mos Eisley Cantina. Fun fact about that popular Cantina band song, it's actually called Mad About Me, although I prefer Dune Sea Special. Yeah, I honestly think that this was the best option with what they could have done. Doing it this way means that you can really construct kind of whatever band makeup that you want. Whether it's just the one Figrin and the one nail-in, or you want to go with 5 for that retro 1998 Power of the Force 2 band makeup, or 6 and get 1 for each instrument, or 7, 8, 9. I mean, you can have earth, wind, and fire numbers here if you want to. Also, they did it in a way that you only have to have one nail and shield because he comes with everything you need right in the box. So while it's always going to be expensive to army build this out, it could have been worse. The only downside are the excessive amounts of clue horns and Duranian Beshnikels and what are either fanfares or double Jossamers. Again, I have no idea. It's one of them, probably. Also, let's face it, everyone knows that all Biths look exactly the same. It's a stereotype for a reason, so let's just take a look at the figure, all of them, all at once, because, they're the same. So this is Fiery Figrin Dan. They call him Fiery because this Bith is in heat. He's sculpted in entirely new parts from head to his toe, which is great. Starting with his head, he has a big old dome. He has that classic generic 50s alien look with the big eyes and the big head thing going on. He has a sculpted crack going right down the middle, which definitely makes it look like a butt. And that's not helped by the crack ending right on his mouth, which strongly resembles a butthole. Listen, I tried a couple different jokes here. This was the only one I was comfortable with putting on YouTube. Everything here is sculpted with a surprising amount of detail. He is deceptively plain, but there's actually a lot here if you know what to look for. There's a nice wash that brings out all the folds and wrinkles in his face, especially along the sides of his head. He also has those big black dead shark eyes that are on virtually every Funko Pop figure. So if you like Funko Pops for some reason, this guy right here is right up your alley. I know I sound really negative here, but I mean this in all of the best way possible. The eyes are actually a nice, shiny, glossy black that really sells the alien features. I really actually dig how he looks, and I think Hasbro absolutely nailed the face. And then for every bit of detail on his face, his clothes are the exact opposite. Now, it's not Hasbro's fault these guys basically dress like Steve Jobs with these long sleeve black turtlenecks, but that's basically what they're wearing. There are folds and creases all over, which is nice. And the shirt actually has a hem sculpted on where it fastens onto itself, and that's really well done, but there is not a lick of paint on here, which again is fine, it's just a black shirt. His hands, though, are crazy, sculpted with all kinds of bony protrusions and long, slender fingers. They look like they were sculpted by H.R. Geiger himself, with all the ridges and veins and whatnot. And just like the head, they have a nice paint wash that brings out a lot of the detail in the recessed areas. But it may be a little bit too heavy on the wash, but to be honest, I'd rather have a too heavy wash than no wash at all. I also love that his hands are sculpted in a way to make it look like he's actually playing an instrument. In a normal C-grip hand or a cuppy hand, as I like to call them, all of the fingers are universally clamped down, which is why we have a few sticking up to make it look like he's fingering those notes to make that sweet, sweet jizz. Moving down to his pants, I mean, they're pants. I don't really want to talk about them because there's nothing really to talk about. They're gray, they're pants. And he has these little black boots. Both his pants and the boots are sculpted with the appropriate amount of detail, but neither of them has a drop of paint either. It's all molded plastic, baby, but honestly, it's fine. It works. The only paint on this guy is the head and the hands, just like when I finger paint. He also has a pancake butt. Poor guy. So I'm actually going to break tradition here and talk about his articulation before we get into his accessories, because we really have some interesting stuff to go over. First, we have a normal movement in the head. We have that dual jointed neck that's been a thing since 2018, so we have all the ball joints at the base of the skull as well as at the base of the shoulders. This provides a little bit more range of universal head motions, but it's not quite as much as I'd like from this guy, to be honest. He also has a nice hinge and rotation at the shoulders and a nice cutout under the torso that allows the arm to have some decent movements as well as a nice relaxed pose. And his elbows have a deep cut allowing for a very nice greater than 90-degree bend. Or I guess like less than 90-degree bends. Have we been using this term wrong? I mean, this right here is a 180-degree angle. This is a 90-degree angle, which means that this is actually less than 90 degrees. I mean, That's what you want, right? And now we come to a brand new type of articulation on a figure. Or if it's not brand new, it's a joint that I've never noticed before. The wrists on old Figrin here are actually ball jointed. Previous Black Series joints, even those in other lines, are usually hinged one way or another, either up and down or side to side. Some of them give you better motion depending on what the figure is, but I always find a pose that I want a figure to be in where I wish they actually had the opposite styled wrist joint than the one they came with. Figrin here can actually do it all. Up, down, left, right. I mean, it's a ball joint. Literally every Black Series figure should have this from now on, especially Troopers and Jedi, although the motion isn't quite as drastic as it would be with a dedicated hinge. I would gladly trade it all in for universal directional ball joints. And then, because not everything can be great, for some reason Hasbro has neglected to add a butterfly joint on this figure. And if anyone can make good use of butterfly joints, it's someone who's holding an instrument in two hands. Butterfly joints allow the arm to come closer together, making two-handed poses for holding, like, say, a lightsaber or a blaster in two hands way easier. It's noticeably absent here on Figrin Dan, especially for being a brand new figure with all new parts. The rest of the figure from the waist down is mostly pretty standard. He has a decent torso joint that allows for a good range of mobility. His hips move out, back, forward, side to side. We also have an upper thigh swivel. The knees are the newer style, which is actually an older style that was first used on a fully sized figure with Jakku Ray back in 2015. But in 2020, Hasbro decided to make this the new standard, and while I didn't like it at first, it did grow on me. Since they're pinless, the joints are stronger and don't have that gummy feeling that can warp over time. I do think they look better when standing there, and I find the movement isn't quite as good as some of the double jointed legs, but it's good enough for Figrin here. We also have a rare extra joint down here with the boots. There is a swivel cut right at the top of the boot, which allowed Hasbro to not have to paint the pants or the boots since they can be molded out of solid plastic, but it also allows for a bit of extra movement, which is nice. And then the ankle has that typical hinge and rocker, with this being Figrin's widest stance with both his feet flat on the ground. Rocking out with that rocker, but not jizzing out with that, you know what, never mind. And with these decent elbow and wrist joints, it gives Figrin the ability to hold his accessories. And yeah, I guess that's a good segue to start talking about his accessories. So first, we'll start with Figrin's actual instrument, the clue horn. The clue horn basically looks like a bassoon. It's molded in a dark gray plastic, but has a heavy silver dry brushing, which gives it a worn metallic look. The mouthpiece is a rubbery plastic material, which allows you to actually plug it into the Bith's mouth hole, which is a nice touch when posing. And finally, it can be split into two pieces for easy storage in a music case that it doesn't come with. Honestly, it would have been a nice touch if they'd given us some kind of music case to be able to store the instruments in. Next, let's jump over to the Duranian Beshnikel, also known as a Fizz with 3 Z's. Technically, if we're using the Fizz, and you know what? I'm just gonna say Fizz from now on because Duranian Beshnikel it's a mouthful, and I don't want a mouthful of jizz. Anyways, if he's holding the Fizz, making that jizz, that makes this guy doik nuts. Now the Fizz sort of resembles like a didgeridoo, but with a mouthpiece. Or maybe closer to like a bass oboe or something. It's really hard to say. It's just about the same length as the clue horn, but thicker. It's molded all out of one piece of plastic and has some gold and silver accents. And again, the mouthpiece fits right into the Bith hole. And then lastly, we have either the fanfare or the double jossamer. I still have no idea which is which, or if it's just two different names for the exact same instrument. Either way, with this in hand, it turns Figrin Dan into either Tedin Dahai or Ichabel Gaunt. The instrument itself is much smaller than the previous two, with a lot more subtle details molded into the plastic since this instrument is ridged, almost like a heatsink. While it's not painted exactly as I would have liked it, it should really be more metallic looking, but it's fine, it gets the point across. My other problem with this instrument is that it's significantly smaller and thinner than the other two instruments, which means that not only does it like to slip out of the figure's hand, it's hard to get him to hold it with both because of the lack of the butterfly joints. This instrument perfectly highlights the few flaws that I have with the figure, and just like the other instruments, there is a smooth piece to fit right inside that chocolate starfish of a mouth. And that is everything that Figrin Dan comes with. As far as getting him, he's currently being released in stores and at every online retailer as part of the current mainline wave of figures. You know, those things that I used to do reviews on all the time. Weirdly enough, for someone who is literally made to be army built, Hasbro only packaged this guy one per case, but they double packed the Darth Vader, which is, by the way, mostly the 2017 release of Darth Vader, but that's a comment for a completely different video. All in all, this figure is not super hard to come by. He's not exclusive to anywhere. I ordered 2 from Hasbro Pulse. I got 1 from the full case of figures that I ordered from Entertainment Earth. Then I ordered 3 more from Big Bad Toy Store because they were actually one of the first to get them in stock in a weird turn of events. I do wish that these were packed 2 per case instead of the Vader. It just makes more sense. It's kind of weird that he wasn't. Thankfully, he actually didn't end up being that hard to get. I've seen him a couple times in stores physically at both Target and Walmart. I really do want to show Hasbro that this is the kind of thing that I want from them. The line's very light on fun-looking aliens, and especially Cantina aliens, which are traditionally a staple of Star Wars toy collecting and have been since the late 70s and early 80s. Hasbro, give us more of this. With this quality, but you know, with butterfly joints. Overall, I really like Figrin Dan here, and I like it even better that he could be 2, maybe even 3 different guys, just by putting something different in his hand. In a collecting climate where people are complaining about repaints and reuse, I am celebrating this. I've never before army built any figure like I've army built this guy, but also as a figure, he's nothing spectacular, but he matches what we got on screen for the short amount of time that he was on screen, and does the job that he needs to, plus more. He is far from perfect, but none of his flaws are egregious enough to the point where it detracts from the figure. There is a lot more to like about him than there is to not like about him. And while that about does it for Figrin Dan here, we're not done with the video yet. Not by a long shot, because the band is only half filled. Next, we'll look at the deluxe release of Nayland Cheel. So out of the box, let's just get this out of the way. Nayland is the exact same figure as Figrin Dan. Well, mostly the same figure. He comes with 2 slightly different things right out of the box. He has different hands. Instead of being molded to look like he's fingering some swinging jizz notes, these hands are molded in traditional C-grip or cuppy hands because Nayland plays the band fill, and I guess these are the best hands for doing that. Speaking of which, let's talk about the band fill. So the band fill looks like some kind of accordion bagpipe hybrid. It has a strap that slips over the big bulbous head. Based on the pictures I could find, this is as close as I could really get to get him to holding it properly. I think that the band fill that Hasbro gave us may be just a smidge too big, and this is another instance where the lack of butterfly joints really hinders him from properly holding his own instrument. His left hand is supposed to cradle the bottom of the band fill, and the right hand goes to what I think are the keys on the top by the mouthpiece. The mouthpiece, of course, fits right into his little balloon knot of a mouth, and the sound, I guess, is supposed to come out of these little horns on the side, but maybe also this big one on the front, maybe both or all 4, I guess. I honestly have no idea how space bagpipes work. One other thing about this instrument, more than any of the rest, you really need to be careful with it. The straps here are actually pretty sturdy, but Nayland has a big head, so getting the band fill on and off can be dangerous. Also, these little horns jutting out of the side seem to be a little fragile, so be careful when you're trying to pose him because this arm loves to bend this horn. But lastly comes my biggest critique. The band fill is molded in one solid plain gray piece of plastic, and there is absolutely no paint on it whatsoever. Not a drop. No silver accents, no dry brushing, and it needs it. It needs it badly. So far, this is by far the worst instrument out of the 4 that we've looked at, which is unfortunate because, I don't know, I like it. But that's not all that Nayland came with. Fortunately, because he is a deluxe figure after all. But like we all know that really doesn't mean much with the recent releases of Boba Fett and Cobb Vanth. But Nayland here is different. He actually comes with a lot of stuff. Next, we'll look at the Cassan string drums. The next accessory is the drums. Now, since we have him on the drums, he's no longer Nayland Cheel. He is Sunil Eidi? I don't know how to pronounce it. However you pronounce it, that's how I pronounce it too. Unlike the other band members, he's not just a simple instrument switch because the drums require the use of these little mallets or drumsticks. And to hold on to those, you actually need these special hands. These hands included with Nayland Cheel are molded to fit the drumstick right in because they are molded with a much smaller hole, which is great. They do pop on pretty easy and they pop off just as easily. These hands are also fun and maybe my favorite hands of all 3 unique pairs that we got with this figure. Mostly because you can do that stereotypical Italian talking with your hands motion. You know the one. The drums themselves remind me more of a marimba or a xylophone than they do actual drums. There's not a lot of molded detail into the plastic, but while it's definitely not one solid piece of plastic like the band fill, there is absolutely no paint on the drums whatsoever, which is disappointing because just like the band fill, it really could have used some. Also, I'm pretty sure that this is the way that faces the figure. But honestly, all of that is sort of okay because next we move on to what is clearly the star of the show, the Omnibox. Now being on the Omnibox means that Nayland Cheel becomes Tech More. Omnibox extraordinaire. The Omnibox reminds me of a theremin, an instrument with an ethereal sound played by waving your hands around a magic box with some antennas on it. I don't know how it works. To go with that, Tech has some alternate hands that you can pop on that are sculpted flat and open for waving around the Omnibox. Honestly, this is a nice touch. Hasbro probably could have gotten away with just having us use C-grip hands, but they didn't, and I'm very cool with it. But more than that, the Omnibox is actually sculpted with a seat. The stool itself is a separate piece that is removable if you want to, and it has pedals. I mean, for real, it's got pedals. I don't know why I love this so much, but I do. I do wish the pedals moved, but they don't, and I guess I'm okay with it. Thankfully, it's pretty easy to get Tech to sit on the stool properly, and his feet fit naturally on the pedals. It's all pretty sturdy. Honestly, this is probably one of the best accessories Hasbro has ever given us in the Black Series line. The Omnibox itself has a lot of details sculpted into the actual box, lots of ridges and knobs and buttons, but also a wire sculpted down the stand which reaches the pedals that actually has paint on it. It's not a lot of paint, but compared to the other 2 instruments in the pack, it has some, and they have none. And there is one last accessory in the box I haven't mentioned. He also comes with a 3rd pair of hands that are just the regular hands that Figrin Dan comes with. You know, the ones that make him look like he's fingering notes. He honestly doesn't need them at all, but I guess it's nice that he comes with them in case you want to swap out the hands with any other instruments just to change it up. I'm never gonna balk at extra accessories, especially for a deluxe figure at a deluxe price. And that is everything that Deluxe Nayland Cheel comes with. If you want this figure to complete your Cantina band in the US, he is exclusive to Hasbro Pulse and Shop Disney, and I assume that means that he'll be in the Disney parks as well. I'm not entirely sure. Outside the US, honestly, I have no idea. I assume Hasbro Pulse for the UK and Canada because, you know, that's a thing in those countries. He's definitely not perfect. He's less perfect than Figrin Dan was. He's a little pricey even for a deluxe. His figure has the same issues that Figrin Dan does with the articulation because it is, again, the exact same figure. And most of the instruments he comes with are severely lacking in any kind of paint, which is absolutely noticeable. That being said, I'm still super glad that I own him. The band absolutely would not be complete without him, even for a bare bones band composition. But I am very glad that I only needed to buy one of him. Really, my critiques for him come down to nitpicks and having high expectations of my figures, especially for this price. But my choices right now are own it or don't own it. And honestly, not owning this was never really an option for me. If you're only gonna choose one of these two, I would say choose Figrin Dan. He's the better choice in terms of what he comes with versus what he costs. And while you don't need to build out 7, I would say that they look great when all grouped together. And also, a huge thanks to Landspeeder Luke for sending me this 3D printed Cantina Band stage. Check out his Patreon if you want to print one for yourself. You know, now that we have Cantina Band, we have Dr. Avazon and Panda Baba, Hasbro really does need to start releasing the rest of that Cantina setup. Personally, I'm hoping for a Hammerhead, you know, Mammal Naden and all that jizz. Oh, and before we go, you might be wondering, Mike, what about Liren Karn, the 8th member of the band and the backup Cluehorn player? You know, the one on the box he talked about. During the Cantina scenes, he's sitting in a bar, chatting it up with Mooftak. If he can't be bothered to be on the stage, I can't be bothered to add him to my collection. But I would love to see some customizers make him wearing that spiffy jacket of his. So let me know in the downstairs area if you agree with me or not about my thoughts and opinions of this figure. Whatever your opinion is, I do know that there's one thing that I have in common with the band. We have all profoundly disappointed our parents with our life choices. And now is the part where I'd love to take a moment and just thank all these people here on screen for supporting me on Patreon at a Black Series level or higher. This really helps me out with YouTube costs and means a lot to me that you have supported me even though I don't produce nearly as much content as I used to. Also, thanks again to Landspeeder Luke for sending me that stage. I really do love it. And that's all I have. If you could give this video a like, that would be cool. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm. Also, subscribe if you haven't yet. Share the video if you want, or don't. Do what you want. I'm not your dad. But thanks for watching. Thanks for getting this far. And I'll see you later. Bye.